had it not been for Bukele, I don't know if I would have came back. So that's what made me move. Now, what made me stay was definitely the Bitcoin aspect. Where are you from? What are you doing here? And if you just tell them I want to experience what this is like, they're going to show you. They're going to invite you into their phone. They're going to invite you into their favorite place. You can get by just a single person with $1,000 a month and live a very comfortable life. Live close to the beach. Have your basic necessities covered. Have great food. That's the one thing. The food here is fantastic.
How important do you think is El Salvador in this global Bitcoin narrative?
Getting into El Salvador now is like...
Are you actually originally from El Salvador, or did you move?
My family is originally from El Salvador. Yeah, they like a very typical story. They left during the Civil War, which is a very dark time in Salvador's history, and they relocated to Canada, which is where I was born. And so I was born in Toronto, Canada. Spent all of my young life there. Started coming back to El Salvador. My parents would bring me when I was a young child. Then there was about a 15-year gap, I want to say, where I didn't visit El Salvador. There was a lot of things going on in the country, turmoil, conflict, gangs, a whole bunch of stuff going on. So I didn't really feel the need to come back. It did call me. And then as I got older, and I had traveled a little bit more, I started to see a lot of similarities between the countries that I visited and El Salvador. Being from Toronto, there aren't that many big cities like that in the world. Toronto is one of a few when you really think of the architecture and just the first world, quote unquote. And then you start to realize that really the rest of the world is not like that at all. And the rest of the world has more similarities to each other than Toronto does. So when I would travel, I started seeing a lot of those things that I missed about El Salvador. So when I got older, I decided I was going to start traveling to El Salvador a little bit more often. And that's what brought me here. And that's what brought me here to Immersion. That's what brought me down to Bitcoin Beach. I really wanted to get back in touch with my roots. Really wanted to, reach back and spend more time with the family that I had down here in El Salvador and connect a little bit more with where my family came from. It was something that I was missing and something that I was definitely curious about.
Do you think you would have moved back anyways, even if Nayib Bukele and Bitcoin and all this stuff going on in El Salvador over the last 3 years was not there? When did you move back?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. And the way that you've asked it is what makes it so interesting, because had it not been for Bukele, I don't know if I would have came back. I wasn't a Bitcoiner, to be fair. Part of my story was I from Toronto. I have a financial background, went to school for business and commerce. And so very fiat minded when you think of the big city. So I was into financial tools and investment tools and things like that, money markets and all that, the fun stuff, bonds, whatever. But it was really during COVID, when all of that stuff happened, that I was looking and comparing everything that the government in Canada was doing versus governments across the world, plus me being from El Salvador and noticing what Bukele was doing at the time in 2020. He had just won presidency. So he was maybe a year into the position. And not many people were paying attention to what El Salvador was doing because it's a small country. Most people can't even point out where El Salvador is on a map. But I'm paying attention to it because my family's from there. My family would always watch the Salvadorian news on TV. And so I was comparing everything that was happening during COVID directly with the Canadian government and the Salvadoran government. And, 4 or 5 months after COVID, let's call it June 2020, I really started leaning more towards, I liked what Bukele did in El Salvador. I think it was a fair and just system, at least more fair. And I'm comparing the two governments this whole time. And so at that point, I had pretty much said to myself, well, this was a big test of where I want to spend some more time in. And so I made the move to come to El Salvador before I even knew about Bitcoin. I knew about Bitcoin, but I didn't know there was the Bitcoin Beach project happening down here, which started back in 2019. I didn't know. I didn't know what Bitcoin Layer 2 or Lightning was. I was just curious about El Salvador, curious about getting in touch back with my roots. And I really liked when I compared what the governments were doing. I enjoyed the approach that Bukele took to COVID and to the whole pandemic situation. So that's what made me move. Now, what made me stay, I would say, was definitely the Bitcoin aspect of it. The plan was to go to El Salvador, explore the country, and maybe explore the rest of Central America, kind of see where I could fit in. And then, as I'm here, while I'm down here, Bukele makes that big announcement at Bitcoin 2021, I think it was, right?
Yeah.
Bitcoin Conference 2021. And so I hear it and I'm like, wow, this is great. This is interesting to me. I didn't really know what Bitcoin was at the time. I hadn't really, didn't take that deep dive into the rabbit hole. But I'm like, okay, this is cool. No one else has done this. And then I'm starting to meet all these great minds, all these intellectual people, all these people with a mission. And I'm starting to meet them here in El Salvador. And that's what really made me fall in love with the place. That's what made me stay. Meeting people, and you've had them on your podcast, Nikki and James, just that type of community. Honestly, that's what made me stay. I tell that to people all the time. Bitcoin didn't bring me to El Salvador, but the community and the Bitcoiners that I've been able to meet here, the opportunities, the conversations, that's why I'm here. And that's what's so special about El Salvador.
That's amazing. And what did you then decide to do with Bitcoin? Like, what brought you into Bitcoin? Was it like the vibe going on because you were in El Salvador, because you heard about Bitcoin more and more? So basically, was it like the environment pushed you a little bit towards Bitcoin?
Yeah, definitely. The environment, the projects, the conversations I was having with people, the proof of work. Let's not beat around the bush. It was people looking to solve real world issues, not just make a quick buck. Everywhere else I'd been to in the rest of the world, it was all about, how can I make that quick dollar? Whereas in Salvador, it was, well, how can we fix these issues that we're currently having? And so it was that environment, it was that, just that battle, that willingness to figure solutions, find solutions for these problems. That's really what drove me to stick around and to start my own project. Working with a couple of the projects here and discovering what they were doing, I realized, well, this is a lot bigger than what I thought it was. And I want to deep dive and I want to learn more about Bitcoin. And I need to take this opportunity to learn from, the best, I want to say, because the people here are doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like I searched a little bit what you're doing, and you're obviously that Bitcoin hardware store where you are actually right now sitting, but you're also doing other stuff. What made you open this Bitcoin hardware store? Did you saw like a demand for hardware wallets? Did you saw
it was my own experience of learning about Bitcoin here in Bitcoin country. Going through the Mi Primer Bitcoin program, understanding the importance of self-custody, and then realizing, it's not that easy to self-custody. You have to find a hardware wallet, you have to order it, it has to come through the border of El Salvador. Things are a little bit more expensive here, technology-wise, for all the fees. And I consider myself a pretty good learner, pretty resourceful. I love going on YouTube and just searching things up. I don't need anybody. If I'm interested in a subject, I'm going to go and take that deep dive. And it was difficult for me even, right? Starting up my own node, doing a whole bunch of things. So that's what made me realize, well, if I'm having this problem, if this is an opportunity or an experience or a challenge that I'm having, then there must be other people. And ultimately what I'm looking for is to help the Salvadoran, help that person that when I look at a Salvadoran, I see my grandmother, I see my father, I see my sister. And this is where it's all starting now. Education is the key to everything. And I say this, and I might have heard this in other places, but the work that Mi Primer Bitcoin is doing, that the Ministry of Education is doing, focusing really on education of Bitcoin is so important. Because without that education, that's where, people can get scammed, people can get lied to, misinformation. So that's the important aspect about all of this. And that's really what drove me to start the project is we need to make people feel comfortable. And the best way to make them feel comfortable is by actually having a physical place, creating that reputation. Because when everything's online, it almost doesn't feel, it feels like something's missing, that human connection, right? So I wanted to have a place where Salvadorans could come, ask questions, and learn how to self-custody and really understand what Bitcoin is. You know, Bitcoin is not just Chivo wallet failing every time that they're trying to use it. No, Bitcoin doesn't go down. When I go to the supermarket and I'm trying to pay for food, Bitcoin doesn't, it's not that Bitcoin isn't working. It's that maybe your system isn't working, maybe the internet is down. So it's just all this misinformation, and the ability to be able to solve it for people is what allowed me and made me really want to start the store, because I was coming across those problems.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. I think in our Western civilization, where the leaders are really skeptical about Bitcoin, and then also the mainstream media is skeptical about Bitcoin. Probably the Bitcoin ETF will change a little bit of that, but right now it is still like that. And it comes, the skepticism and the misconceptions in people's mind usually come from top down. They come from mainstream media, they come from governments, they come from high officials, they come from politicians that people trust, and they have no idea what they're talking about Bitcoin. But the interesting thing about El Salvador is there's the highest man in the country, highest man in from political stuff, is talking so good about Bitcoin. He's on Bitcoin podcast. He embraced Bitcoin. He invited Bitcoiners and Bitcoin to the country. And still, I think there are probably a lot of misconceptions in the community in El Salvador. The adoption is not at 100%. It's way lower than that probably. What do you think are still the biggest misconceptions in El Salvador about Bitcoin? And how do you see the progression going on? Like, how fast, for people that are outside of El Salvador, how fast is the adoption growing? How fast are people getting used to paying in Bitcoin or accepting Bitcoin as payment? Is probably also not possible in every store. How is the actual current right now?
Yeah, there's a lot of barriers to entry from the local point of view, right? And the Bitcoin Beach project and what they did is a great example. And a great, I think, a microcosm of how everything is across the world, where if you look back into what they were trying to do, when the Bitcoin Beach program started, they started by trying to teach the entrepreneurs, the business owners of the town, and saying, here's this new technology, this is how it can be used to benefit your business, let's move forward with it. And the business owners fought back. They're like, no, we don't like this, we don't know what this is, we don't really care to learn about this. So then they went back to the drawing board and they said, okay, well, let's start with the kids who are using phones every day, understanding technology, understanding social media works. And then, so they went back to the drawing board, started with the kids, and that's how the Bitcoin Beach program actually started, becoming what it is today. And so there is a lot of misconceptions about Bitcoin. Within the community, within the locals, a lot of it is that, Bitcoin is from the government. They don't understand how to differentiate between Bitcoin and Chivo wallet and the government. They think Bitcoin is from the government, which is interesting. When you're not from El Salvador, you know that it's completely different. The government and Bitcoin are not related whatsoever. And so it's this misinformation, which I think is what makes so many of Salvadoran education projects so important, because you start educating people and answering their questions. And so there's the misinformation aspect of it, that they don't trust the governments. There's been so many problems from the 1970s, even before, 50 years of conflict, that it's going to be very difficult for them to just go ahead and trust the new government, just like this. Now, the Bukele administration has done a great job of them trusting it, which is why Bitcoin adoption is actually a lot higher than I sometimes. I'm surprised when I go to towns that I've never been to, and I see Bitcoin signs up. It's not many, but you'll find a few. When I go to a random town, I'd say maybe about 5% of the businesses will accept Bitcoin. If you go ahead and ask every single person, about 5% of them will accept Bitcoin. And that's, to me, that's way better than even you think, right? I live in El Sonte, so Bitcoin adoption here, I'd say, is about 70%. Pretty high. I was having this conversation yesterday with some other business owners of who accepts Bitcoin, who doesn't. And so when you're looking at the economy in terms of legal businesses that have an actual legal representation versus the smaller guys. The big businesses, most of them accept Bitcoin now. You know, we're talking about the Walmarts, the McDonald's, the hotels, the restaurants. It's legally required for you to accept Bitcoin now. Not all of them do, right? So the adoption is actually going on a lot better than I assumed, or a lot better than I think most people assume. It's not used every day, so there are some times where, you know, the POS systems are not charged. There are some times when if it's the owner of the business and he's the only one to accept Bitcoin on his phone, and if he's not around, then they don't accept Bitcoin. That's a big one. Or, you know, they say the Bitcoin network is down, but it's just the internet is kind of slow. So there are these obstacles that we're learning to use, and that's where we come in, and we're like, well, listen, if the boss not being around is a problem for you to accept Bitcoin, well, we have this POS system. You know, you have the Blink POS system, you have the Tianki POS system, where the boss doesn't need to be around to be able to accept Bitcoin. You can accept it, and you don't have to worry about your employees sending Bitcoin out; they're just receiving it. So there are solutions. It's about educating people on the solutions. Ultimately, you leave El Zante, where it's about 70% Bitcoin adoption, I would say. You go to the big city. The big city, I would say, is about 10% Bitcoin adoption when you consider all the big players that are around. You know, I go to the doctor and I pay with Bitcoin. I go to my dentist and pay with Bitcoin. I'll pay for my food, my stay. I'm living on a Bitcoin standard now, but I'm mostly between El Zante and San Salvador. And so in between those places, I pay for my gas with Bitcoin. I do my car rentals in Bitcoin. Anything that I need really at this point, I've created this network around me where I'm always looking for new places to accept Bitcoin. I still go visit new places and then ask, and I do my part to ask every single business if they accept Bitcoin. And if they say no, I tell them, well, listen, I really would have loved to have tried your product, but unfortunately, I live on a Bitcoin standard. So, and I'll tell you that a bunch of people that I'm with, and on the side, I also do tours. So when I take a whole bunch of tourists, and I'm like, well, look, these 10 people behind me, they all want your stuff, but they can't pay for it unless it's with Bitcoin. Then it gets the brain working, like, oh man, maybe I should. And then next thing you know, they're like, oh no, you know what? I do have my Chivo. Here, you can pay with Bitcoin. And so, it's a work in progress. And a lot of it is that they're not within the Salvadoran community. It's not used as much. But just yesterday, for example, I had someone come into the store, a Salvadoran. I've never met him, never seen him at any of the meetups. He lives about an hour and a half away from the store. And he comes in, and so Salvador comes in, and I'm like, hey, what are you looking for? He's like, I heard you have seed signers. And so that first question kind of blew me out of the water. I'm like, how do you know about seed signers? And he's like, well, I've been looking to get the pieces, and I emailed Seed Signer on their website, and they said that you had them. And then he just kept, every question was the perfect question he was asking. And every time I made a suggestion, he would rebuttal me with good, solid points. And that's what makes me realize that there is some friction, but it's this young generation. He was young. He was maybe 26, 27, very young kid. And it just brings me hope, because it's the younger generation ultimately that is the future, right? It sounds very cliche, but it's the young generation that's the future. We are trying to obviously have mass adoption and make sure that everybody gets on board. That's a pipe dream. You're never going to have 100% adoption. But with the young generation, it's absolutely fantastic. The Ministry of Education is also taking a big role in trying to adopt or trying to educate the kids here in El Salvador, which is not happening anywhere else. And so, technology can also be a big part of the barriers. Some people don't have phones. Some people don't know how to read, actually, can also be a problem. Some people don't know how to read and write. And so these are things that I think, as we continue to grow, as Bitcoin adoption and as Bitcoiners come to El Salvador, we will figure out a way to solve these problems. The Bitcoin community will figure it out. The Bitcoin community is very resourceful. So I look forward to it. I do. The one thing that I hope Bitcoiners out there are listening, please try and do your best to learn to speak Spanish, because that's a big one. If people who are coming here want to help Bitcoin adoption, speaking Spanish and being able to communicate with someone is probably the biggest barrier right now. It's we, Bitcoiners understand the network, understand how it works, understands the importance of it. When you can't communicate that across to the person in front of you, it becomes very difficult. They're not going to be super on board because they can't read, they can't write. So you need to be able to speak to them in a way that they understand. Obviously, being able to communicate with money is great, but the barriers right now are very simple, in my opinion, to overcome. It's just education, practice, constant hearing of do you accept Bitcoin? Do you accept Bitcoin? Blink has a fantastic shirt that says "Puedo pagar con Bitcoin." Can I pay with Bitcoin? It's these simple things just to get them. It's marketing. When you take a marketing class, they tell you that you need to hear a brand 7 times before it actually gets stuck and imprinted in your head. So it's the same thing with Bitcoin. Keep pushing it. Eventually we will learn, and I'm seeing that curve go up. At first, when the government gave out $30 to everybody, Bitcoin was the talk of the town. Then it started going down, the bear market, and people started forgetting about it. But now I'm seeing that trend go back up. More businesses are accepting Bitcoin. The businesses that have stuck the entire, 2019 or 2020 to now, 4 years, those businesses I see a smile on their faces when people ask them if they accept Bitcoin, because they understand the value of their money now going up. Foreigners are coming, tourists are coming to spend more money at these businesses. And so the business across the street that didn't accept Bitcoin, they might not understand Bitcoin. They might have been totally against it because of education, the misinformation, because of the government, and not wanting to align themselves or not trusting. But they're seeing all these people and all these foreigners coming to spend Bitcoin at this place because they spend Bitcoin. Now they're starting to accept Bitcoin. They're starting to put up signs. Yes, we do accept Bitcoin because they want the business, healthy competition. And so there are some barriers to entry, but from my point of view, things are getting better. The education is there. The products and services are getting better. And as more Bitcoiners come to El Salvador to experience this, I think it's just going to continue to grow. And so again, the only tip I have is do some Duolingo before you come, because that's the way that I see this really Bitcoin adoption accelerate, is when we're able to really communicate with the people that we're trying to do business with.
Yeah, it's amazing. And this also leads me, I find it fascinating because in Austria, in Germany, here in Europe, I think in all the countries in Europe, probably also in America, Bitcoin is seen as this thing for criminals, is this shadowy thing still. I think it gets now better with the Bitcoin ETF. And it's interesting that in El Salvador, it's not seen as something for criminals. Maybe there's someone that sees the government as criminals, but but it's usually Bitcoiners. But they don't see it for criminals. They conflicted with the government. And this is really interesting, like how the just the view, like where you live, changes the view of the things. And this also perfectly shows that people are not critical thinking of the stuff they're doing. Because someone in Austria should not think that's for criminals, and someone in El Salvador should not think Bitcoin is from the government. So they should just study and educate that. And I talked with a lot of people. How is he called? Like Juan, that also has the Spanish podcast in El Salvador. That I think he's now living in Spain, but he's originally from El Salvador. I think we need that. I unfortunately cannot speak Spanish, but I will try when I visit there to learn some Spanish, but I think I cannot master it completely. I learned actually some Spanish in school. Maybe I can get some words out. And this leads me to...
Let me tell you, shout out to the Germans. Lots of Germans out here, and they try, and they speak it very well. So I want to say, thank you to the Germans out there, because that is going to break so many barriers. Think about it. The Salvadorans learning about Bitcoin, they must feel a little uncomfortable. And so the foreigner trying to explain it in Spanish also makes it uncomfortable. And that creates a real bond. That creates a real connection, whether we admit it or not. And it's two people being out of their comfort zones, but speaking a similar language. It's undescribable. So that's just a little tip that I have. If we really want to focus on adoption here in Latin America, which is really needed when we look at countries like Argentina, Venezuela, Colombia, El Salvador, where it's legal tender. I think it's an important step for us as Bitcoiners coming to visit these places, because it just becomes easier, and then we can maybe accelerate that adoption.
Really, really cool. And you lived in Toronto, you live now in El Salvador. Would you recommend for people that now don't know Spanish, but they really like what Nayib Bukele is doing? They are kind of frustrated with the government, maybe in Germany, maybe in London, maybe wherever it is, are frustrated with their government. They like what Nayib Bukele is doing. They like what's going on in Bitcoin land in El Salvador. Would you recommend for them to just like move there if they are able to? And if you recommend that, like why and how?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, everybody comes from different situations, different circumstances. So I can recommend it 100 the way I see it. And maybe, I think this might resonate with people listening to your podcast, is when you hear about Bitcoin, if you're not technical, the best way to learn is to just immerse yourself. You need to understand. When I started finding out and hearing about Bitcoin, I didn't know the difference between a seed phrase, a passphrase, a master, none of this stuff. But how did I learn? Well, you just deep dive. You just start listening to the podcast. You start hearing the words just repeated over and over and over again. And at first, it feels uncomfortable. Maybe, man, am I dumb? Like, I don't understand what any of these things are. But you have to immerse yourself. So that's the same thing I recommend. You want to come here to be in El Salvador, you don't have to know any Spanish, but it helps. But when you're down here, you're going to immerse yourself and you're going to learn, because there is no other option. You want to communicate with people, you're going to have to practice your Spanish. And it's the same thing with Bitcoin. You want to learn about Bitcoin, you have to immerse yourself, get into the technicals, hear those same words and messages over and over again, because you're going to want to figure it out. So I would recommend it for anybody who is tired of it, to come down to El Salvador, see what it's like, find your place. The great thing about El Salvador is you have the beach, you have the mountains, you have a few cities, so you can kind of find, what it is that you're looking for. The Bitcoin is concentrated mostly to Horizonte, San Salvador, and now there's Berlin, El Salvador, which is on the east side of the country. So there are little pockets where it's really concentrated, but you can find kind of anything in between, which is absolutely fantastic. So I recommend, if you have some friends that are already down here, or you can always reach out to me, get down here, see it for yourself, find a place physically, geographically. If you don't like the hot weather, go up into the mountains a little bit, and then start creating that community. Start putting yourself into these situations that at first may not be comfortable. But the one thing that I keep hearing, and the reason that I came down here really, is the warmth of the people, how happy everybody seems to be, how accepting everybody seems to be. When you come into a new town, let me tell you, everybody knows you're not from there. And when it's a small town of a few hundred people, when I showed up, everybody knew I wasn't from here. And the first question was, where are you from? What are you doing here? And if you just tell them I want to experience what this is like, they're going to show you. They're going to invite you into their home. They're going to invite you into their favorite places. They're going to show you around. They want you to feel comfortable. And it's something that I've not never, because I have felt it traveling travel to certain places where people are very inviting. But that's the one common thing I keep hearing about people that come to visit El Salvador. Everyone is very inviting. Everyone wants to invite you to eat. Everyone wants you to have a drink with them. And that's part of the culture. That was the culture that I was missing out in Toronto, was that family-oriented culture of let's have dinner together, let's share around the dinner table. That's normal here. When you go to a restaurant, when you go to a pupuseria, there aren't these tables that are separated. It's kind of like one large table, and you want to eat there, you have to find and sit beside people that you've never spoken to before. And unless you want to be that guy that doesn't speak at all during dinner conversations, then you're going to have to make conversation with people that you've never met before. And so I would 100% recommend anybody who wants to come down here, do it. There's really nothing to be nothing to be afraid of other than maybe you just get lost and you lose your signal. But we have technology, Google Translate. It's a lot easier to get around these days. It's a much safer country, so you don't have to worry about any of that anymore, which is absolutely fantastic. It takes a whole load off people's shoulders. You land at the airport. People do speak English, so if you speak English, you should be okay. And then you just go and you look around. It's absolutely fantastic. I'd recommend, getting a car, using the tools, Google Maps, doing some reading material before The Lonely Planet. Lots of Bitcoin bloggers or Bitcoin podcasters that speak about their experience. Come down, visit Insulte, come down, visit Bitcoin Beach. Lots of people with very similar stories. And then you'll be able to pick up pointers from here. So that would be my recommendation. If you're intrigued and you want to see even if you want to see what is possible where you're from, then it's necessary for you to come down to El Salvador, come down to Insulte, Bitcoin Beach, see what people are doing, and see what you can take from that, what you can learn, and maybe you go and you start your own circular economy in whatever city you're from. But it's very inspirational what's happening down here, so I definitely recommend it to anybody who's interested.
How hard is it to get like a residency there? It's like some countries it's really hard to get a card there. I noticed it myself because I have an Indian girlfriend she moved from India now here to Austria. And I just know the hurdles, like you have to comply with so many stuffs, like you need so long and you have to work with a company. If you change the company, there's like complicated stuff there, but that's Austria. Austria is complicated. I guess El Salvador is easier.
El Salvador is easier. It is a commitment if you're looking to come down here, especially a time commitment. You have to spend, I believe, about 8 months of the year in the country. So it's a bit of a time commitment. Right, so it's not difficult. The government definitely is looking to bring bright people into the country and offer incentives. So it's getting better. With people who are coming, making noise, and telling the government, hey, we think this is better. The one thing that I do tell people is what makes this place great for me is that in the governments that I've seen and where I live, it's almost like the government wants to shut down every idea that comes from the people. It's like, if it comes from the people, we're going to shut it down. We're going to make it super difficult for you to do this. Whereas in Salvador, it's the opposite. They may not help in the way that we'd like, but the great thing that they do is they don't try to stop you. They'll let things kind of happen. And so that's what I'm seeing happening here in El Salvador. So it's not easy, but they're not going to make it hard on you, if that makes any sense, right? So, and it's just a bit of a time commitment. You do have to have the time. You have to have patience, to want to be down here, and then you'll do it. I know many people who are on that path right now, and I think it's few and far between the ones who come, try it out, and don't enjoy it and go back. I don't think I've met anybody actually who has come down here, is in the process, and then said, no, it's too difficult, gone back. Everybody comes, they start thinking, do I really want to make this big commitment? Because it is a big commitment. But once they're in it, I don't think I've met anybody who regrets that decision.
Really, really cool. And just like for comparison, in Austria, you need around like 500 to 1,000 euros for rent. For a normal place, of course, there are stuff to rent for like 300 euros. But then you have a shared kitchen. Then you have like a really like a low quality of place. Then you need another like 200, maybe 300 euros to eat your that you can eat. And there's like, of course, insurance and taxes and stuff like that. But how expensive is it compared to like the Western civilization, Austria, America, London? How much euros, dollars would you say you need a month roughly to live in, to come by in El Salvador?
Yeah, if you wanted to live in San Salvador, in the city, or even some of the smaller places, $1,000 a month will get you by, US dollars. And so, rent for a house can be small little place just for yourself, $300, $400, $500 a month. But that's we're talking just certain parts of San Salvador. It's all depends on community. When you're here in El Zonte, you just rent can be $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
So it really varies, depends on where you want to live. But you can get by just a single person with $1,000 a month and live a very comfortable life. Live close enough to the beach. Have your basic necessities covered. Have great food. That's the one thing. The food here is fantastic, and it's not as costly as the rest of the world is. My point of view is a little different because I do come from Toronto, which is one of the most expensive cities in the world. So for me, it was great, But for some people, depending on where you're coming from, they look at El Salvador and they're like, it's not as cheap as I thought it was. And I think it really depends on where you're coming from. So El Salvador kind of sits right in the middle. You have access. So this is what I tell people actually. If you want to live a luxurious lifestyle, you have access to that lifestyle, but it is luxurious and it costs a lot of money. If you want to have a basic lifestyle, you also have access to that, and it's not as costly. You could grab yourself a nice small little motorcycle, pay because there's no snow. Pay $40 a month in gas. Your electricity could be $20 a month. Your water $10 a month. Your internet $20-$30 a month. Your cell phone $10 a month. Your rent $400-$500 a month, and you're good. And then your food. So you're at about $1,000 a month, and you're good. So, and then when you look at it, that the minimum wage in Salvador is about $400 a month, and people are surviving off of that, then it means that you can as well if you want to live that lifestyle. So there's a good balance. Just depends on what it is that you're looking for. You'll find it all. I'll tell you that much. You'll find whatever lifestyle you're looking for.
Really cool. I think El Salvador is a place I have to visit in. I think November is the Bitcoin conference. I'm really close, like from my point of view, really close to El Salvador when I visit the Bitcoin conference in July in America, in Nashville.
Yeah,
it's the first time ever to be in America in that side of the world. I'm really looking forward to it, and I hope I can make it this year to El Salvador. I made so many contacts already on the podcast. I had so many on with James, so many with Juan, with so many people that are in El Salvador, and I'm really looking forward to meet you all. But this kind of brings me to my next question. How important do you think is El Salvador in this whole global Bitcoin narrative? Because a lot of Bitcoiners are talking about it. A lot of it comes up in a lot of conversations. It comes up in negative, but also positive conversations. There's so much going on. Like if you talk with people outside of the Bitcoin community in the Western Hemisphere, they are talking about El Salvador. Oh, there is this leader. This is like a dictator. But then I ask them, okay, what did he do? What's bad about it? And they usually they just say, oh, it's a dictator. But then I go into Bitcoin community and I talk with people actually having contact with El Salvador, having actually contact with people there, and they're like, it's a much safer place now. It's a place with more tourism, a place with more prosperity. It's a place of hope and not of depression now. So I really think El Salvador is really glowing. But how is this El Salvador story important, or how important do you think it is in the whole Bitcoin global adoption narrative?
I think it's very important. You mentioned it right off the bat. It's a beacon of hope. There's not that many places like that in the world right now. And, coming from where I'm coming from and seeing people where they're moving from, we have lots of people from Canada, lots of people from the US, UK, Europe, different parts of Europe. And so I think it's very important. This is ground zero. Salvador being the first place in the world to make Bitcoin legal tender. And to answer your question, and I know it might not be the answer people are looking for, but it takes time. These things aren't going to happen overnight, and you're not going to get the answer overnight either. And is he a dictator? Who knows? Definitely, you ask the Salvadorans, we're definitely going to say no. 90% approval rating says he's not a dictator, at least to the Salvadorans, to us here. But then the rest of the world who, has different news outlets saying different things about him and using certain points as a negative. So I think it's vital to where we're going, and it's where everything started. So I think we look over the next 10 years, I think that's really going to dictate how important El Salvador is to Bitcoin and to the global economy and to just what's happening all over the world. I'm a big believer in the administration, in the direction that it's moving, in the direction of that Bitcoin and Bitcoiners are taking it. There's such a large concentration of super intelligent people, very well off, with great projects and just great vision, that I really don't see a place right now where El Salvador fails at its mission. The people that are here are putting in the work, and it takes a while for that work to really flourish, for it to become something. And so I'm excited for what's to come. I'm excited to see El Salvador in 10 years, and I think Stacy and Max and Stacy have said this. Getting into El Salvador now is like getting into Bitcoin back in 2011. Nobody knew where Bitcoin was going to be. 10 years, 14 years later, did anybody think Bitcoin was going to be at $70,000, give or take? I doubt it, right? And so people were excited back in 2011 about it getting to $10. So I think the same thing, and I agree with Max and Stacy when they say getting to El Salvador and being here right now is like getting into Bitcoin in 2011. It's just going in the right direction. Lots of people working towards a better future, and I think it's very important because 10 years from now, El Salvador is going to be that example. Other countries that are going through similar difficulties, similar challenges with crime, with the depression and the economy just doing really bad, or their dollar crashing. El Salvador is going to be that beacon of hope. And it's going to be, if you can follow what El Salvador, what the administration has done, then you're going to have an opportunity to better yourself. It's up to you whether you take that opportunity and if you do good or bad, but it's going to be that leader. And I really look forward to seeing what's to come. I look forward to being a part of it, play my little part in what's going to happen here in El Salvador. And I know many other projects are hoping for the same. And we're just putting in the work. We know that if we do that, do the work, then 10 years from now, I can't even imagine what El Salvador is going to look like in 10 years. So I really, I say that to everyone around here. If you're looking to build, if you want to do something, you're tired of where you're currently living, come to El Salvador. And you don't necessarily have to stay here, but it's a good place to get some inspiration and then bring that back, because ultimately we want the whole world to have Bitcoin adoption. We want 99%. We want hyper Bitcoinization. And for that to happen, you need to come to El Salvador. You need to see what's going on. You need to learn from the people here. And then you need to go back to your place and then spread that word and do the things in your way, obviously, because every geographical place is a little different cultures, but it's a good place to come learn. So I would say El Salvador is right now, is going to lead by example. And I don't hope for the best. I know that I'm going to, and myself, and I'm not speaking for other projects, but we're doing what we can to make sure that the outcome is what we want it to be. What we want it to be is a better world as Bitcoiners.
21 Bitcoin is Bitcoin only from day one, and they teach and preach self-custody. This is my go-to exchange when someone asks me, oh, where can I buy my Bitcoin from? This is the easiest entry for Bitcoiners. And if you want lower fees, plus at the same time support this podcast, use code Robin and click the link in the description. Yeah, I think I had a podcast with Luke Mikic, and he said something about in the last 3 years, the only thing outperforming Bitcoin was real estate in El Salvador.
Wow, really? He said that?
Yes, Luke Mikic said that, and he is making then an argument that Argentina is also on the way up and also really doing good. And I think he thinks about investing in Argentina and El Salvador real estate, something like that. But I did not go really deep in that. But yeah, El Salvador is a good place, and if you like, if you are a massive Bitcoin OG maxi with a lot of Bitcoin and you want to somehow invest in something related to Bitcoin, I think El Salvador is a nice place. It has a true potential. of course, it's not Bitcoin. Like El Salvador is still a country, and a country is like a company. When the leadership all of a sudden turns for the worse, El Salvador can be also really bad in 10 years. But as it goes now, it seems really good. It seems really positive, and so it's like an investment. You can make an investment in El Salvador and in Nayib Bukele, and it's you can do it. But yeah, the basic thing is like Bitcoin is a savings device, and maybe you find some really good investment outside. And I think El Salvador is an interesting country to look at, and this is why I also invite so many people from El Salvador to this podcast, because it will be so interesting to see when we have El Salvador in 10 years. And then I can look back at the podcast I did in 2024, 2023 with the El Salvadoran people and say like, oh, this is how they talked about. And now it's actually like that. And then I can clip that and make this nice content, make a documentation out of that. Like that's why I'm so passionate. I'm doing every day a podcast. I'm publishing every day. I'm recording every day. I just want to grasp the Bitcoin adoption on this channel, and El Salvador is an extremely important part of that. That's why I want to talk with everyone that is willing to talk Bitcoin in El Salvador, even though the stories are really similar. So it's like not something completely new, but it's important. And as you said before, in marketing, you need to hear something more and more. So like we need to like, even with self-custody, I have people from self-custody every time on and on and on. Like I had like 5, 6, 7 podcasts on the topic of self-custody, why it's important, what we should do. So I will do it over and over again till everybody gets it.
It's the only way to learn. You have to immerse yourself. You have to hear the same words and terms over and over again. That's how you're going to learn Spanish. If you want to come down here, you have to do the work. And, I think the people who are here, I can speak for myself, coming from a financial background, El Salvador has a lot of upside, right? A lot of upside, a lot of value. And so I'm betting on that, but not only betting on that, I am part of this world that we're living in, and I can actually have a little bit of an impact. And I feel like a lot of my peers here in El Salvador feel the same. We're doing what we can to have some impact, and then not really hope, but we're just working towards that this will turn into something a lot bigger than more than just a little country, maybe one day the entire world.
Now, a little bit more difficult question. Do you have any specific country in mind that might be the next El Salvador?
That's a tough one. I think it'll be another Central American country, for sure, just with the proximity to it. Like a Mexico or a Guatemala or Honduras, maybe not a Nicaragua, but something close to it. I think, we have so many similar problems, so many similar issues. And I think they're going to see it firsthand, because they're seeing, the tourists going maybe to all the tourists that were going to Mexico, maybe start diverging down to El Salvador, and then Mexico sees that as a challenge to their status. So I do see one of the Central American countries kind of being on board before anybody else, maybe Argentina, with the new regime that's there, with the new administration. So I definitely see it as a Latin American country, just because I also see Bitcoin solving a lot of the problems there. There's a lot of similar issues happening in the Latin American countries where they're just so reliant on the old system. So that's I can't give you a perfect guess, but it'll be a Latin American country, in my opinion.
And what would you do if there was no Bitcoin? Like, what do you think you would work on or study on if there was no Bitcoin?
That's a great question. If there was no Bitcoin, oh man, I don't know. I probably just focus on traveling more of the world, learning more, maybe trying to be more self-sufficient. Buying land in Salvador and then just disappear and try to become as self-sufficient as possible. Build a little farm, build a little citadel. If there's no Bitcoin, then I want some cows, some coconuts, some mango trees, some lime trees, some chicken stock, and then disappear and call it a day.
I could imagine you on those kind of farms. I really love it. We're having an end routine on the podcast where the previous guest asks a question for the next guest. And your question is Bitcoin for you divine? Is Bitcoin divine for you?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I would say yes. I would lean towards yes because of its purity. And I think what brings all the Bitcoiners together is that it brings us to a level playing field. And for all these people from all these different places to come together, from geographic places and just different backgrounds to come together, then it's something special. And to me, that's what divine to me means special, authentic, and pure. And so the fact that so many people that don't know each other grew up in totally different parts of the world, and we can come together, then to me that is divine. So yeah, I would lean towards yes.
Yeah, it's definitely like that. I think it's a great thing. It's also lean towards it's a discovery and it's not created. If Satoshi Nakamoto did not do it, then it would have just came somewhere else. Like we were ready for that kind of technology, for that kind of an idea. So we kind of discovered it, stumbled upon it, and we did not create it. Of course, there was someone creating the code, but it's more a discovery of than a creation. Yeah. Then thank you for your time, Ronny, and I really thank you for giving us insights and recommendation and tips even to coming to El Salvador and giving us the one part of my small documentation about the Bitcoin adoption in 2024. I have this big goal of interviewing 300 people this year. I'm now at 75. You're my 75th guest, and I'm thanking you to be part of that. And for people that want to ask you questions, want to maybe come to El Salvador, maybe want to in El Salvador and want to buy from your Bitcoin hardware store, where can people reach you the best? Is X the best place to ask you questions? Or
thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. Funny, since we're talking about divine, 75, 7 and 5 are my two favorite numbers. So very interesting how that turned out. And I was born July 5th, so 7 and 5 as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
It was meant to be.
Yeah, you could definitely say so. So if you want to find more out about the Bitcoin hardware store, you can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Instagram, TBHS_SV. You can ask us any questions. You can also email us, hello@tbhs.sv. Or you can reach out to me personally on my personal Twitter, and it's Ronny, RONNY, Avendano, AVENDANO _ on Twitter. So you're more than welcome to find us on there. Have any questions, or come down to El Sonte Bitcoin Beach and find us at Entrada Número 2, entrance number 2 to the beach. The Bitcoin hardware store. If you have any questions about self-custody, or you're looking to get a no KYC custodial signing device, we're here. And we'll answer any of your questions, and you can enjoy the beach at the same time. So hope to see anybody who's interested, and I hope to see you soon, Robin.
Of course. Thank you for being on, Ronny.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.